I have presided over thousands of cases in my years on the bench. I have heard every excuse, every explanation, every carefully crafted story meant to bend the law just enough to avoid its weight. I have seen anger disguised as innocence, arrogance disguised as confidence, and sometimes truth buried so deep it takes patience to uncover. But every once in a while, a case walks into the courtroom that refuses to behave like a case. It doesn't stay within the neat lines of legal procedure. It doesn't fit inside statutes or fines or violations. It lingers, it unsettles, it asks something more of you, not just as a judge, but as a human being. That morning began like any other, files stacked, names called, violations processed, efficiency over emotion. That is how the system survives. But when his name was called, something shifted before he even spoke. I looked at the man standing before me, mid-40s perhaps. His shirt was clean but worn, the kind of fabric that had been washed too many times because replacing it wasn't a priority. His shoulders were slightly hunched, not from defiance, but from weight. Invisible weight, the kind people carry quietly. His hands were clasped tightly in front of him, not in fear of punishment, but as if holding himself together. "State your name," I said. "Daniel Harris," he replied. His voice was steady, but not strong. "There is a difference. I have learned to hear it." The clerk read the charge: running a red light, a $90 fine, routine, predictable, the kind of case that usually takes less than a minute. I looked at him and asked the standard question. "How do you plead?" "Guilty, Your Honor." No hesitation, no excuse, no attempt to negotiate. And yet, he did not move. That is always the moment I pay attention to. When someone says guilty, but does not step back, does not release the moment, does not accept closure, it means the case is not finished, even if the paperwork says it is. "Is there something you'd like to add?" I asked. He hesitated, not theatrically, not for effect, but because whatever he was about to say cost him something. "Yes, Your Honor, there is. Now listen carefully, because this is where most people expect an excuse. But what I heard was not an excuse. It was something else entirely." "I know I broke the law," he said. "I'm not here to argue that. I need you to understand why." And I remember thinking to myself, this is not about a red light. "Go on," I told him. He swallowed. His eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted again, as if gathering courage not from within, but from somewhere far away. "My son, he's in the hospital." There are words that enter a courtroom and change its temperature. That was one of them. "How old is your son?" I asked. 10. 10. Old enough to know fear. Young enough to need his father more than anything in the world. "And what condition is he in?" I continued. Daniel took a breath that did not fully reach his lungs. "He has a rare heart condition. We didn't know about it until a few months ago. By the time we found out, it was already too late for most options." He paused, not for effect, for survival. "They told us, we don't have much time." Now I want you to think about that, really think about it, because we hear phrases like that all the time. Not much time. But what does that actually mean? It means every minute becomes a negotiation with reality. Every second becomes something you cannot afford to waste. Every delay becomes unbearable. And then he told me about that day. "I was at work," he said, "trying to keep things normal, trying to hold everything together, and then I got the call." "What call?" I asked. "From the hospital. They said he was asking for me, over and over again. He was scared." His voice cracked then, just slightly, but enough. "They said I should come as soon as possible." Now here is the part that stayed with me. "I didn't think about the rules," he said. "I didn't think about the light. I didn't think about anything except getting to him." He looked at me then, directly, not pleading, not begging, just honest. "I saw the red light. I knew it was red, but all I could hear was my son's voice in my head, asking for me." Silence filled the courtroom. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom, the kind that comes from recognition. Everyone in that room understood, at least for a moment, what it means to love someone that deeply, and then he said something I will never forget. "I didn't run the light because I don't respect the law," he said. "I ran it because, and for a moment, I couldn't afford to respect anything more than my son." That is when the case stopped being about a violation. That is when it became something else entirely. But I am a judge, and being a judge means you cannot simply feel, you must also verify. So I asked, "Is there any documentation to support this?" He nodded quickly and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Not neatly kept, not organized, just carried. The clerk handed it to me. It was a hospital document, time-stamped, a call record, notes from a nurse, and at the bottom, a simple line. Patient repeatedly asking for father, appears distressed. And then something else. A small handwritten note. Please hurry. I sat there for a moment, holding that paper. Because that note was not written for me. It was not written for the court. It was written for a father. And yet, somehow, it ended up here, on my bench, inside a case file. I want you to think about that. How often does the system see something like that? How often does a piece of someone's pain make its way into a place built for rules? Now the officer who issued the ticket was present. I called him forward. "Officer," I said, "do you recall this incident?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did the defendant mention anything at the time?" The officer nodded. "He said he was trying to get to the hospital. I hear that a lot, to be honest. But he wasn't aggressive. He wasn't dismissive. He just seemed desperate." "And did you verify his claim?" "I couldn't at the time, Your Honor. Procedure required me to issue the citation." "Of course it did. This is what happens when systems forget people. Not because they are cruel, but because they are designed to be consistent. Consistency is necessary, but sometimes consistency forgets compassion." I looked back at Daniel. "Did you make it to the hospital in time?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yes." "And?" He closed his eyes briefly. I held his hand. That was all he said. But sometimes, that is everything. I leaned back in my chair, because now the question before me was no longer legal. It was moral. Do you punish a man for breaking a rule when the reason he broke it reveals something profoundly human? Do you uphold the letter of the law at the cost of ignoring the spirit of justice? This was not just about a $90 fine. This was about what kind of system we are willing to be. I looked at the room, at the people listening, at the quiet understanding that had settled over everyone. And then I spoke. "Mr. Harris," I said, "the law exists to protect life, not to punish love." He looked up, confused for a moment. "You made a choice that day," I continued. "A difficult one, a dangerous one, but also a deeply human one." I paused. And while the court cannot encourage the breaking of traffic laws, it also cannot ignore the truth behind your actions. I held the document in my hand. "This is not just a case file," I said. "This is a reminder that behind every violation, there is a story. And sometimes, that story matters." I set the paper down. "The fine is waived." There was no applause, no dramatic reaction, just a release. A quiet, collective understanding that something right had been done. Daniel stood there for a moment, as if he hadn't processed it yet. "Thank you," he said softly, and then he left. But the case did not leave me, because that is the thing about moments like this. They don't end when the courtroom empties. They stay. They remind you that justice is not just about rules. It is about recognizing the humanity that exists beneath them, and if you take nothing else from this story, take this. Sometimes the law asks us to judge actions, but justice asks us to understand them. And on that day, understanding mattered more than punishment.